what's the biggest stress you have in your life? And my dad kind of sat back and said, probably work. And the doctor said, well, could you afford to give up work? And it kind of landed my dad. He was going, can I afford to give up work? He was 48 years of age. And he sat back, and interestingly enough, he had engaged with somebody and he had taken out what's called income protection. And income protection, for those people who don't know what it does, is if you're out of work due to illness, you get paid up to 75% of your wage, including social welfare. So you get up to 75% of your wage until you can go back to work or you retire, whichever happens first. Now, you have to be medically certified by their doctor and your doctor that you're not able to work. But he kind of sat back and said, well, maybe I can claim this. And he did. And it took him 2 years to get his head around, but at 50 years of age, he stopped working. And when he stopped working, he didn't sit back and do nothing. Like, he got involved with Sister Stan in what was Focus Point at the time, is now Focus Ireland. Unfortunately for me, I was going into secondary school and he started driving the school bus and did the parents committee. He was always in and around the school. So he got very, very engaged with the community. He didn't sit back and do nothing. And his income protection provider were happy for him to do that. But I genuinely believe that if he hadn't been sold, and he was sold it was the 80s when he took that policy out. He was sold it by an advisor. If he hadn't been sold that policy, we wouldn't have got the next 38 years out. Like, he died just gone in December, and we got a whole pile of extra years because he'd engaged with the financial advice world. And they probably made a bucket load of commission off him in the 80s, but it served him really well. And I sat back and I kind of looked at it and said, if it wasn't for the financial services, I wouldn't have had a dad in my teenage years, in the school or not in the school all the time. I wouldn't have had him. And he would have, the stress would have killed him. And it did mean that when I came out of college, I was attracted to the industry. And as soon as I got into the industry, I said, this is what I want to do. I believe people are much better served with financial advice. And the stats to back that up. If you have a good financial planner, you'll have 2.5 times the net worth of a person who doesn't when you retire. And it's also such a privileged job. Like, think about it. Your GP gets to engage with your life when things aren't going great and you're not feeling well, and maybe annual checkup or whatever. But in general, it's something's going wrong with you, you go to your GP. Your accountant maybe looks at your finances on a year-to-year basis. I get to sit down with people and look at what their life has been, but more importantly, what their life is going to be and what they want it to be. And then I get to sit on the sideline and watch people use their money, support the life they want to have. And it's such a, but not only that, it's not like I look at the medical, I look at the financial, I look at the personal, I'm looking at everything. What an insight I get into a person's life. And then people let you in. And you kind of, I'm not saying I'm responsible for it. Nothing, like, everyone creates their own wealth and lives their own life, but it's such a privileged place to be. And it's a job I absolutely love. But it's also a job that gave me a dad for an extra 20, 30 years.
Super. Yeah, he'd be very proud now. I've no doubt he would. Do you know, one of the analogies that often comes up is a car. When you think about a car, it's a vehicle. It takes us from A to B. And you wouldn't consider not putting fuel in that car. Without it, it can't travel anywhere. And I loved some of the analogies you've often used. Fuel in a car, in a vehicle, is required to move. Money is that fuel, whether it be in personal life or business life. And we don't spend enough time, as you say, getting professional advice on the proper fuel to put in your car or get the best value. And, you know, we'll buy a diesel or we buy electric, whatever that fuel may be, to get you the best value and the best range anxiety. It's a great analogy. Owen, is that the biggest problem that business owners especially are facing, that they leave that financial advice to the end of a lot of their business planning?
Yeah, like, I think that one of the things the last 12 months has done for the business owner or the person running a business is, I think, like, if you take back to personal finances for a minute, for years, I've been talking about a buffer and how much of a buffer should you have. And the buffer you should have would be 3 months if you got a really stable job. And what I mean is 3 months salary. So if you're making, just keep the math simple, if you're making €1,000 a month, you should have €3,000 sitting in your buffer, that if life happens, and I'm talking about good stuff and bad stuff, like the washing machine breaks down or you get invited to a wedding, right, in ordinary times. 3 months, if you're in a really steady income job, is generally okay for your buffer. And if you're not, 6 months. Now, when I used to say 6 months, people would think I'm nuts. Not anymore. Okay. And the same, sometimes we think, oh, business finance and personal finances are different. They're not really. Like, companies now can sit back and say, wow, if I had have got this land last March and realized that this was going to be this long, if I would have slept so much better if I had had 6 months cash flow in front of me. Now, most smaller businesses in particular will not start thinking about their cash flow properly until there's a bit of a problem, or they can they're losing sleep over, oh God, I've got a couple of weeks money left in the bank account. And I think the last 12 months will remind us all, and sorry, the savings rates would show it. Corporate savings are up, personal savings are up ridiculously. Like, we have 125 billion roughly is what's sitting on bank accounts now at the moment. That's just households. And to put that in perspective, we typically, as a country, individuals in this country would save on average around 443 million a month. In April last year, the first full month of proper lockdown, we saved 3,000 million, 3 billion. And we have added exponentially more money in the last 12 months to our savings than we've ever have before. It's the same with corporates. Lending has come down, personal lending and corporate lending has come down. I'm talking about business lending has come down, and deposits have gone up. And it creates a real problem for the banks. And what I would say is the problem the banks have is it's costing them money to have it sitting on deposits. And therefore they have to charge you, but therefore they are keen to lend. They are much more open, and particularly with some of the government supports and stuff that are there for giving money out, they're much more keen to lend. I was doing a thing last week with the SFA, the week before, and it was really interesting to look at all the different bodies that were there that were basically saying, come and borrow money off us. And the reality is that if you listen to the news, you would absolutely believe that the entire country is on its knees. And don't get me wrong, there are certain sectors of society are absolutely on their knees. But there are 2 million people in Ireland who are better off as a result of COVID. Their salaries have stayed the same, whether it's through wage subsidy or whatever else, their salaries have stayed the same and their expenses have fallen through the floor. And what's great about it is because there is a kind of a negative narrative out there about the world is falling apart. I surveyed people on my Instagram a couple of weeks ago, and 13,000 people replied to the one question that I asked. And the question was, would you pay more money for the same product if it was coming from an Irish company? 83% of 13,000 people said they would. There's a real support there for support local, support Irish. I put a post on my Instagram on Saturday where I had bought something from Louis Copeland, right? And you see, I always get the slagging. People always slag me saying, oh yeah, he's a financial planner, he doesn't spend money. That's not true. Like, a proper financial planning is about spending your money, not spending your money on stuff that's not important to you. So you have more money to spend on the things that are important to you. It's not about penny pinching, it's about spending your money wisely. But I bought something from Louis Copeland and I put a post up on it on my Instagram to say, delighted to be something along the line, delighted to be sporting Irish. And by the way, I wasn't paid to post this. I paid full price for this. And it would be dreadful of me to be expecting it for free when their shops are closed. The support and reaction that you got from that post, which was effectively a plug for Louis Copeland, right? But there's just this sentiment out there, let's support Irish. There is an element of, and I think it's been lost along the way in some other areas of society, but there is an element of, we are all in this together. Yeah. And I think that's really important that we capture that. As I always say, there's no, girl sitting in Milan right now saying, I think I will buy something from the local shop in Ireland. That's not happening. In the same way, we shouldn't be supporting a local shop in Milan to buy our clothes from there either. We should be supporting Irish as best we can and go the extra mile to try and get these companies, because if we don't, nobody else is. And if we don't, they're not going to be there in 12 months' time.
Yeah. And that's those statistics that you just did as a straw poll on Instagram are certainly holding true. Amoric did a survey on behalf of the local enterprise offices just before Christmas, and it was 85% were looking towards shop local and doing it online. You mentioned buffer. I remember one of the famous episodes was where you were dealing with the dog walker down in Tipperary and credit, because you mentioned credit there, and it was that mindset switch of moving from that credit focus that was costing money to actually moving to having a buffer, and using that as a driver. And by the way, quick reminder, and I see a couple of questions on, I'll put them in a second, but Eleanor's put one in and Kerry Wells has put one in. I'm going to come to them in a second, but please, any questions you have, throw them into the chat and I'll put them to Owen. But explain that buffer that you just mentioned, the difference between your own buffer and then financing from a credit point of view.
Yeah. First of all, just to give Samantha Rawson a plug, she's not a dog walker, she's a dog behavioralist coach.
Apologies. Sorry, Samantha, if you're watching.
Samantha
and if you're
Rawson's
here.
been around since the early 90s, training people to train their dogs. And actually, with the puppy pandemic we've just had, or the pandemic puppies that came about in the last 12 months, it's been really good for her business if she was able to get out there. But she is superb. People might know her. She did a regular stop for a long time on Ray Darcy and a few other things. And she was episode 2, I think, this year. But she's brilliant, really, really cool. She's on Instagram as well, actually, really cool, really laid back. But what she was doing was, and think about this for a second, right? She had savings in a bank account, and then she was borrowing money from the same bank. So think about that for a second. We're talking about negative interest rates. We're talking about banks are going to start charging you for having your money sitting. And they're already doing it in Germany. They're already doing it to corporates here. Pension funds here sitting in cash are being charged in some circumstances. And what she was doing was, think about what she's doing. She had 20 grand, let's say. She was putting it into a bank. She was getting 0.1% on it, let's say, right? And then she was walking to the next counter over in the bank and saying, can I have a loan of 20 grand? And they were giving her back her own money and charging her 8% on it. And her mindset was, I'm much better off doing that because I'll always pay back the loan. And what I tried to change with her was, and it's not just her, the reason, like, this should resonate with lots of people, borrow it from yourself. Pay it back to yourself in the same way you would pay back a bank or a credit union. Because once you change that around, you're now being much better with your money. But more importantly, you're not paying for some banker's Christmas presents. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden, you are now paying that 8% yourself. And I've often said that to people. People would say, should I get my mortgage over 30 years or 20 years? If you can afford it over 20 years, get it over 30, work out what the repayment would have been at 20, and save that extra amount. And there's lots of things we can do with that. I'm not going to go into, anyone wants to have a look at lockdown plan number 14 on my Insta, and there's a good video there about should you overpay a mortgage, right? But the reality is that we don't have the same association. We actually, the reality is, when there's surveys out there and research out there that shows us we are much more likely to follow a prescription for our dog, and the research is actually dog, nothing to do with Samantha, for our dog than we are for ourselves. Okay, yeah. We have much more ownership and responsibility about looking after someone or something else than we do ourselves. So we are more likely psychologically to say, I have to pay the bank back, okay? And then we are to say, I've borrowed money from myself and I need to repay it. Like, think about it. The average pension pot in Ireland is about 120 grand at retirement. Yet, most people, the average person saves 300,000 euros during their working life. But do you know who they save it for? Their mortgage provider. A mortgage is around 200 grand. Was the average when I did these figures about 3 or 4 years ago. It was around 200,000. Add the interest onto that, it's 300 grand. Now, how can we save 300 grand to put into the banker's bank account each month? Well, we can't. We can only save 120 grand for ourselves. It's because it's a responsibility to somebody else, and we're much more likely to put other people ahead of ourselves, and you need to flip that round. The buffer is incredibly important. The buffer is about having 3 months that if life happens, or 6 months if life happens, you've somewhere to go other than the bank, to be able to cover life's eventualities. Life is not linear. We've all learned that in the last 12 months, right? Life is not linear, and therefore you have to be prepared to cover off whatever is going to happen and cut that connection with the banks about borrowing money from them, because borrow it from yourself, and it makes such a difference to your long-term financial future.
So Kerry Wells has just said there, where should you leave your business buffer? So if I have a current account for my business, is it okay to leave the buffer in there, or is it better somewhere else to avoid temptation?
Yeah, so what Kerry's talking about there is what I call Parkinson's law. If you have an hour to cut the grass, it takes an hour. If you have 3 hours to cut the grass, it takes 3 hours. Now, if you've 10 grand sitting in your bank account, you'll spend 10 grand. If you have 30 grand sitting in your bank account, you'll spend 30 grand. So what I would say is the buffer, for several reasons. First of all, you don't want to feel richer than you are. It should be in a separate account. And I'm not a big fan of having a spider web of 7 or 8 or 10 bank accounts, but it should be in a separate bank account because it does two things. First of all, when you log on in the morning or you log on to the internet and you can see what your bank balance is, you're not thinking of that as part of the Parkinson's law. It doesn't kick in because you're looking at it going, okay, I have 10 grand in the account, or, oh, I have 100 grand in the account. Your spending habits would be different for the business or for yourself when you've got a bigger bank balance. Separate it off, put it to one side. The second thing it does, though, is it makes you think about when you're taking the money back out of the buffer for something. It really focuses the mind on, is this something I need to do? Like I talk about it on personal shopping, right? And it's the same thing for business, right? Personal shopping, I always talk about the 72-hour rule. You're looking at something online or you're in a shop, put it back, wait 72 hours and decide if you still want it. And that's similar with business buffer. You put the business buffer to one side. When you go to take money out of it, there should be some kind of friction there in your mind as to whether I should do this or not. Is this worth dipping into my buffer for? Whereas if it's just in the bank account, you're much more likely just to grab at it and not really think about it. So absolutely, Kerry, put it to one side.
And advice is something that I think we all need, no matter what walk of life is. So Eleanor has asked there, from a financial advisor point of view, what sort of price should it be? Like, what should we be budgeting for a financial advisor?
Well, we would be probably, in my private practice, and we only deal with a certain level of client, and you can be rest assured, right, this isn't a plug, we are out the door, right? So it's but we would be on the more expensive side, but we're not trying to be the cheapest. We're trying to get the right outcomes for our clients, and we want to be able to put the time into it, and therefore we charge on that basis. And our fees, like, to engage with me, it's 5 grand plus VAT. I don't hold any punches when I say that's not cheap, but I do believe the outcomes. We do have a service in the office which is €1,500 plus VAT, which is with one of the other financial planners in the office. And that is incredibly popular, but it's still expensive compared to what's available out there. You will get someone to do a financial plan for you for €500 or €1,000, okay? And that's not unusual. The ones I'm scared most of are the ones who don't charge you at all. Okay, and commission on products is standard. Unfortunately, in Ireland, we are not set up that you can't, that commission is going to disappear anytime soon. I don't have, like, the commission is not the devil. Transparency is. You need clarity and transparency around how much people are being paid, by whom, and what does that compare to what they would have got paid by somebody else. So whether they go to Irish Life or Zurich or Standard Life or wherever else to place your pension, how does that compare across the board? There are 4,500 different commission options available to the advice community, okay? And when you don't pay a fee, that person has to sell you something in order to keep their lights on. And that's fine if everybody sitting at the table knows that something has to be sold. But I do what we call initial calls. So I do 3 phone calls a day. I have it limited in my diary. I just do 3 phone calls a day to prospective new clients. People book into them. I think they're booked out now in kind of June or July. Now, I could be wrong on that, but generally you'll find they're a couple of months in advance. And it's 3 a day, every day, 5 days a week. Without fail, at least one of those calls a day, the person would say to me, somebody on one of those new clients would say to me, I had an advisor, but it always felt like they were trying to sell me something. And what we would say is we don't take upfront commissions. It's a slightly different thing, right? But we take what's called a trail, and we don't hold any bones about it, right? This is how we get paid. And we charge the fee, and then there's the trail on it as well. But I know when I go through my process, and I know when Carl goes through his process, that my lights in Prosperous will stay on if we only get the fee out of this. The client feels that. We will help clients buy products, but we'll never sell the products. We will do all the application forms, we'll do all the research. But what I would say is, when it comes to financial advice, just the most fear I would have is engaging with someone who says, I'm not going to charge you anything. Yeah. That's where my biggest fear is. And then it's what you're getting for what you're paying for. And that's what it comes down to. And transparency is the most important thing of all of it. Knowing, like in the UK in 2012, they banned commissions. Holland have done it a couple of years before. There's a lot of countries around the world have banned commissions completely. Overnight, within about 12 or 18 months, about 30% of the advice community had disappeared, and there were 5 million orphan clients. Now, orphan clients are, some of those 5 million people are people who won't pay for advice. Best of luck to them. They can afford it, but they don't want to do it. That's fine. That's their choice. But some of those people couldn't afford the advice, and they no longer had the option of paying for the advice through commission structures, and they're left orphaned. So it's a massive problem. Commissions are a massive problem in our industry because the lack of transparency. The regulation is there, but people just don't stick to it. The regulation is just, and since March of last year, actually, your advisor is required not to write it down and hide it and bury it in a document, not just to do that, but to tell you how much commission. And if they can't look you straight in the eye and say, I'm getting paid $4.5 for this, well, then there's a problem there somewhere.
Yeah, because it's multiples of that if it's working right, you're going to save or be able to manage your money of multiples of what the fee would be.
Yeah.
And absolutely. Oh, and I knew this would happen, that we would just do a little introduction and then the questions would fly. So I really want to focus on the questions and make this as interactive to what the people are looking for in the room. So Brenda has asked, hi Eoin, I've looked into this. What is the average cost of a sick pay policy? I know it's hard to give an average, as I know everyone is very different and wage scales differ, but have you any typical figures? And that's from Brenda.
It's interesting for Brenda because one of the things that she really needs to check is when you do an individual income. So there's two ways you can protect yourself if you're sick. One is a lump sum. So it's specified illness cover. You get diagnosed with cancer, heart attack or stroke or one of these things, and it pays out a big chunk of cash, and whether you go back to work 2 weeks later or not doesn't matter. Once you get the diagnosis, it gets paid out. The other one is income protection, which is the thing my dad had. And that is, it pays you your wage until you go back to work, until you're fit to go back to work. Income protection, interestingly enough, if you do an individual policy, you'll pay 100 quid, 200 quid a month wouldn't be unusual, but it really is how long is a piece of string, because it depends on your age, your smoker status, the salary you're on. It's literally, there's so many different pieces to the puzzle that you couldn't give an average of this is what it costs. Income protection is nice because what it does is you've got you get tax relief from the contribution, so the company can pay for it for you and you don't have any BIK on it. What people really need to realize is if you have kind of 5 or 10 people in the company, I would often find, say I'm dealing with a director and they've got a couple of people working in the business, I would often find we could cover the entire employees for in and around the same money if we did a group scheme compared to what it would cost just to cover the director by themselves on an individual policy. And not only that, the underwriting, so how much they look into you on a medical basis is done on a group level instead of an individual level. So it's often easier to get it across the line. So what I would say is this is definitely an area you should be getting advice on. Look at your specific circumstances, because if you can get a group scheme put in place, it's much more beneficial. And that's, you can add on things like life cover onto that as well, death and service benefit as well, and it can be often cheaper. Like I know we changed it a couple of years ago in Prosperous, where I was paying for an individual policy and I converted it over to a group scheme instead because it was cheaper for us. Because once we got more people into the business, it started making sense we could do a group scheme. So yeah. I can't give a figure because it's how long is a piece of string, but my answer would be just check and see if you can do a group scheme. It might be better off you.
No, that's super. That's great. You mentioned, of course, as we were leading into it, that the world is definitely changing and changing fast. So Niamh has touched on this. Do you believe all banks will buy into Bitcoin and the typical way of saving will change very soon, even the likes of pensions? Niamh says that she sees more and more people are not buying into pension providers, but they're investing in their own way.
Yeah, but this always amazes me, right? Any investment you do by yourself, you're outside of pension, you're dealing with your after-tax income, okay? If you invest using your pension, you can invest in all the same things. If Bitcoin is your thing, you can invest in Bitcoin using your pension, but you're doing it with your before-tax income instead of your after-tax income. And then it grows tax-free. And then you get to retirement and you get some of it out tax-free, and then you pay income tax and the rest of it. It's still much more beneficial. Like people say, oh no, I don't like pensions. My mother's friend lost loads of money in their pension. That's like saying, I don't like food. My friend got food poisoning. Like, It's what you do with it. And there is very, very limited things that you can do outside pension that you can't do inside pension. And people need to realize, if we were landed to another country and we looked at the pension setup in Ireland, we would be envious of it. Like, think about SSIAs. Maybe some of the audience is too young to remember SSIAs, right? But SSIAs was basically a pension for the 20% tax, with 20% tax relief on it. You put in £4 and they added €1 to it. The government did. People signed up to it in their droves. A pension is that on steroids. You put in £6 and the government add 4. If I told you you can walk into the bookies next Saturday morning, well, we'd all be delighted if we could walk in, right? But we can't walk in. But if I said to you, I'm going to give you a bet, give me £6, and in an hour's time, I'm going to give you a tenner back. And guess what? You can do that with 15, 20, 25, 30% of your salary each year, depending on what age you are. We'd all be rolling up and doing it. And that's before you've invested the money. Then the money goes into pension. And then you decide, right, am I going to buy Bitcoin? And I'm not a fan, but am I going to buy Bitcoin? Am I going to buy property? Am I going to buy the MSCI? What am I going to do with the money next? And then when it gets invested, it grows. And if you do it right, it grows. And when it grows, you don't pay tax. There's no capital gains tax to be paid on it. It grows tax-free. It's like sticking money in the Cayman Islands, leaving it there for 20 years and bring it back when you retire because you're ready to start drawing down on it. Like, it's just, it bemuses me how we just have this negative kind of pension, I hate them. And the reality is if we were sitting in a room now, what I would ask the whole audience, I'd say to the whole audience, who wants to pay more tax than they need to this year? And nobody's hand will go up. And then say, okay, who's paying into their pension this year? And you'll have, typically the numbers, the stats will tell us 1 in 3 people are in the private sector. Yeah. Now, we complain and we moan and we give out about the amount of tax we have to pay, but yet there are legitimate tax avoidance, not evasion, avoidance legislation there that allows us to pay less tax than we do, and we don't take advantage of it.
Yeah, so it's something to keep an eye on. And a couple of little segues that we mentioned. So Jackie has mentioned Shop Local for Mother's Day, 14th of March, which will come really, really quick. So have a look at shopkildare.ie. And Owen, you mentioned that, we've got somebody in Milan is not going to be looking. In Ireland, we need to look after ourselves in that one. So shopkildare.ie. John has reminded me, and I will throw this up later on. Actually, I'll do it now, John. Might as well. There is on the 25th, Business Financial Confidence for Growth. So the session is a really popular one from 9:30 till 1 o'clock. Keep an eye on that one. There's still a couple of places left in that. But again, I would say keep an eye on the website. There's a lot more taking place, especially in the coming week. And Jackie has also said, I'm putting it off for weeks, but today I'm going to contact the bank to clear my car loan, which is in the same account as my savings. We're all guilty of that, not compartmenting different things from a business point of view, or putting the buffer into a certain different
what's interesting about that, right? Like, it comes back time and time again, and unfortunately the editor always decides just to put it in maybe once in a series, but most people who get involved in the series, because you see, it's different in the TV show. And people who don't know the TV show, there's a show called How to Be Good with Money. It's on Thursday evenings at the moment on RTE1. But people will always say, what Owen said isn't like rocket science. I'm not coming out with rocket science here. I'm telling you what you already know. It's just nobody has said it to you in a while, right? There's no genius about what it is. It's just reminding you that this is actually really, really simple stuff. And like, think about it. You put 20 grand into a bank account, you get paid 0.1. You take 20 grand out of the same bank and you pay 8%. That doesn't make sense. But yet we will all continue to do it all of the time. And it takes somebody to sit you down and say, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And then the penny drops. And you kind of go, I kind of knew that. Yeah, that makes sense. But it does make sense. But that doesn't mean we're all going to do the right thing. We also know that having a pizza on a Saturday night probably isn't all that good for us, but we'll still do it. It's good for, and I live in Kildare. Like, it's good for the pizza man, right? And I'm delighted the pizza man or the pizza woman is getting the support. But the reality is there are certain things we do that don't make sense, but we continue to do them.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need a little bit of a shake to say, okay, what's going on here?
So I might double up the questions and do them in doubles, if that's okay. So we clear them because I come in thick and fast. So I'll do Siobhan and Gary. So Siobhan, have to buy a car soon. Should I use our precious savings for kids and schools and college fund rather than get a car loan? Even if I pay myself back, I may not have enough in 3 years for college time. And Gary adds on to that one, is there a good product available for businesses to save, a bit like a pension for a business or a bond? We've money on deposit with the bank, but it's a rotting away with inflation. So I'll let you take Siobhan's ones first.
Siobhan, the important thing here is you can sometimes use your savings, and it's the same as some people clearing off loans. Sometimes you can use your savings to buy something instead of a loan. The important thing to remember here is don't flush yourself out from a savings perspective, that when life happens, you end up borrowing more expensive credit, like sticking on the credit card or going into the overdraft. So when you wipe yourself out completely, you're a bit more vulnerable, something happens, and all of a sudden you have to grab debt very quickly, more expensive than you would have paid for maybe the car loan or something else. So just be careful about that. Maybe in that situation, if you're worried about college in 3 years' time, I would go hybrid and kind of get some of the savings, some of the loan, and just get less of a loan and continue to pay yourself back. I don't know enough about that person to be able to tell you. I'm going to try, let's try and get through as many as we can. So I'll try and keep my answers a bit shorter, right? And as regards business savings, one of the big advantages is, as an individual, if we save money long-term, kind of 5-year plus, you can invest it in whatever you want. You can do 60-40 portfolio, whatever it is. As an individual, we pay 41%. Typically, we pay 41% tax on the growth. Okay, just the growth portion of it. When a company invests, there is a special rate of 25%. And you can invest it in the company name, the company owns the money, and you put it aside, and you only pay 25% tax on it. It has to be set up properly. The money can be taken back in. We would often use it for companies who want to hold on to their cash or still have it in the company, but then on a regular basis, every couple of years, we would take it from the company investment and dump it into the director's pension. And you don't need to worry about where markets are at the time, because you the exact same investment for the company as is on the other side, and you move one across to the other. So it can work really, really well, but again, get some advice on that.
No, that's super. So Deirdre O'Keefe, and this is what I'm thinking of. Are you against a person shaving years off their mortgage term, or is this up there with your list of insane actions? So she has a little disclaimer. She's jumped the gun and has done this herself with her own mortgage. So she'll no longer be paying a mortgage in her 60s. She took 8 years off. What's your thoughts on that?
So this is something that comes up all the time. So I do a Q&A every Saturday on Insta, and I get thousands of questions. And this is one that repeatedly comes up. There is a longer video I mentioned a minute ago on my IGTV on Instagram, Eoin_McGee. If people aren't following me there, and if you're into Insta, you'll probably enjoy it if you're enjoying this. But lockdown plan number 14 and lockdown plan number 15, I go into this. The reality is I do believe there's an emotional benefit to, if you go into IGTV in the middle there, and you can see they're kind of bluey, keep going down, you'll see them all. As you scroll down, you see them all, they're all very blue looking. Yeah, so that's 20, all the way down to 14 and 15. Down you go.
These ones, yep.
Yeah, so step 14 and step 15, they both go into what we're talking about here, right? And what I would say here is that there's an emotional benefit to clearing off your mortgage. But the emotional benefit only comes, for me, the day you clear it off in full. Okay? There are much better things you can do with your money that could actually clear off the mortgage sooner if you were clever about it. Like, so for example, just a very simple example, nobody who is paying off their mortgage quicker is if you're not maximizing your pension contributions to the full, to the max that you're allowed to do, William, you've no right to go and clear off your mortgage earlier, because you're making life harder on yourself. And what I would always say is, if the mortgage is up here and your savings or your pensions down here, and the objective is to clear the mortgage off early, keep paying the mortgage back and building the savings, and then knock it all out in one go. Yeah. And like paying a little bit extra. And the problem is paying a little bit extra off the mortgage every month to get it gone quicker. The time you need that money back, if it was in the savings, you'd just be able to grab it out of the savings and do it. It's like when you get sick or there's some major catastrophe. You walk into the bank and say, for the last 10 years, I've been paying an extra 50 quid a month off and I need it back now. They'll say, why? Because I'm sick or I've lost my job and I've no income. Well, sorry, you're not attractive to the bank. You're not getting your money back. I hope there isn't a whole pile of bankers on here today, because they're getting kicked, but they have a job too, and banks are very useful, but use them properly, please.
Yeah, and Lisa from Pilates Body, she has a question, and it's a segue to that one, which was paying off the mortgage 18 years early. So I hope that answers the question there, Lisa. The Cahill family, are you best paying off your machinery upfront or leasing them? So same with mortgage, if you can afford to pay. So that was another tag on to that one. You were right, it is the most asked question. But as regards machinery, paying it upfront or leasing?
What I would say there is this is something you need to talk to your accountant about, okay? Because it depends on what way you're allowing the expense go through, and it'd be very specific to your business, and depends on what way the loan is structured and everything else. Cash flow is king in a business, and therefore you can treat it slightly differently, but chat to your accountant about your specific circumstances. Ideally, we'd never borrow money ever. Do you know what I mean? Ideally, we would just borrow it from ourselves. We'd have all the lump of cash there. We'd be able to take it out to buy the machinery, and we'd still have plenty of buffer and be able to cover all the business events that come up. But we don't all live in an ideal world, and sometimes you have to borrow money to get the business up and running, because otherwise you'll just be treading water forever and you'll never get ahead. So talk to the accountant in that specific circumstance.
Oh, and this is brilliant. Funny enough, that mortgage question has cleared so many of the questions that are coming. So we're doing pretty well. We're catching up on it here. There's some really good ones though coming in on this one. Eleanor, income is too low with a family, but should we still be having a pension? And that's always one of the difficult ones, Owen, isn't it? Where, it's tight, but you should have a pension, but you don't have that, I won't say disposable income, but you're struggling to find that money to put by for a pension. What's your advice on that one?
CSO had figures a couple of weeks ago. I was actually shocked. 33% of people who didn't have a pension said they didn't have one because they couldn't afford it, right? And that I was shocked because I thought it would be much higher. 37% of people said they didn't have a pension because they hadn't got round to it. It wasn't an affordability thing, they just hadn't got around to it. But if you're in that category of people who just can't afford it, what I would say is anything going into a pension is better than nothing, okay? And like some pension companies out there, I think you probably get pension provider to do kind of 50 quid a month or 100 quid a month, you would get it in. Now, if you're on the higher rate of tax, putting 100 euros into a pension will cost you 60. If you're on the lower rate of tax, putting 100 euros will cost you 80. So what I would say is start it if you can at all. The best way of doing it, if you're really worried about it, is put the 100 euros a month or the 50 euros a month or whatever, 25 euros a week aside for 6 or 8 months in a separate credit union account or wherever it is, and then start feeding the pension from that, because it'll give you that little bit more security around, okay, I've got 6 months of a buffer there ahead of me, that the pension's coming out of that, it's coming out of that account. And again, I'm not a fan of loads of accounts, but you can see where I'm coming from here, that you're kind of feeling, yeah, I've got that covered. And if anything happens, I've got 6 months of a runway here that I can stop the pension contribution and still have the money there.
Yeah. And you're getting into that, that regularity of habit of putting something by. And I think sometimes that's the hardest part, is once you start doing it, you don't missing it, isn't it?
It's the same with savings, where you're either in the habit of saving or you're not. And you've made that choice whether you realize it or not. So you can choose to save from now on. And I would always say, particularly with savings, like save at a level that is so incredibly low that you'd be mortified with yourself if you didn't do it. Like I'm talking about like a euro a month, a £5 a month, but start the habit and then turn up the volume on a regular basis.
Where should people go for pension advice?
Any employers who are listening to this need to realize, or if you are an employee, you need to realize there is a requirement on every employer in the country to provide access to a PRSA. You have to have designated it, you have to provide access to advice, and you have to facilitate the contributions going through your employees' wages. So ask your boss, or if you are the boss, make sure you have that set up. And if you are the employee, you're not being a pain in the arse by going to your employer and saying, I need this set up. The employers have been fined in the past. It's a very simple, straightforward. Now, let's be really clear. The employer is not required to pay into it. They're just required to facilitate it. So the first port of call is talk to your employer, your HR department, or if you are the employer and you haven't a clue, go talk to your accountant and say, who can I set up this with? Or get a good financial planner. I'm not touting for business, but there's lots of financial planners out there. There's lots of really good ones in Kildare in particular, and just shop around, speak to a couple of them, and you will find people who will go in and look after you and look after your employees.
Brilliant, Owen. I have three questions. Two of them are about the one entity. So we've got the final two. So the penultimate is from Bobby Harper. Are people right to be skeptical of new players coming into the Irish mortgage market?
Yeah, I do. And I think Ulster Bank kind of shook up things for a lot of people last week. I think we need to welcome them absolutely, totally and utterly with open arms. Like, we had a new player in the mortgage market. I'm definitely not going to give them a plug, right? But they came in last year. They introduced a rate of 1.9%. It was the first time in 10 years we've had a rate of less than 2% in this country. It's 10 years since we've had it below 2%. And it took an outsider to come in to shake it up. And all the other mortgage providers came down a bit. We pay about 1% more here for our mortgages than you would if you just happen to live in Germany or France or somewhere across Europe. There's lots of reasons, and the banks will come out and they'll give their rationale and the reasons why, and repossessions are low and cost of liquidity, and all of these are the reasons, and they're all very, very, very valid reasons. But yet an outsider can come in under the same terms and conditions and the same central bank guidelines and put it in at 1.9%. And yeah, there's a bit of cherry picking going on there with who they're giving that 1.9% to. But let's face it, we are small and we need competition. Ulster Bank last week has changed the landscape for the Irish banking system. And I'm worried that it makes, more than anything else, I think the long term here is it makes it unattractive to other banks to be able to say, like when NatWest come out and say, we can invest the same money in other jurisdictions and make more from it, that makes it a very, very unattractive place for big banks to go. Our best bet here is the fintech banks, the financial technology banks that come in and they use us as a stepping stone into Europe. And that's where we're really good. The only thing, regulation, nothing drives cost down more than competition. And we really need to encourage it.
Yeah, agreed. And that segues with the Ulster Bank questions that are here, the two that come together. So Matt, Halo Cafe, advice on dealing with Ulster Bank, please. He's begging on that one. And Deirdre Johnson, tracker mortgage with Ulster Bank, should we hold firm?
Absolutely hold firm, do nothing. There's safety in numbers here, right? This will all happen together where, and particularly with a tracker mortgage, don't go anywhere. Like, just stay tight. Somebody will take that over at some stage. My only fear for people in Ulster Bank, I'm not worried about deposit accounts, I'm not worried about mortgages, I'm not worried about business loans or personal loans. All of that stuff will just be bought up and moved over. The only people I have any slight niggle of a fear would be people sitting on a variable rate. Okay, yeah. So the variable rate, but if you're paying your mortgage on a month-to-month basis, you are attractive to another bank and you'd probably be bought up by another bank, right? It's people who are struggling a bit on a variable rate if they end up with a vulture fund. Because a variable rate, for people who don't know, it's at the bank's discretion whether they put the mortgage up or down, how much they're charging it, and they can do it at their own will. Stick you into a vulture fund and it's likely they're going to start squeezing you. But the ones that end up in vulture funds are the ones who are what's called non-performing. I had an interesting discussion last Friday with John McGuinness, the TD on RTE on Friday morning. And he was saying, we should nationalise, we should take in the thing and nationalise it. And I said, yeah, that protects the Ulster Bank customers, but regulation is what required here to protect everybody from these vulture funds. And I do think there's a bit of tightening up that needs to be done on the regulation side of things, but hold tight. These things take forever. Like Danske Bank announced in 2013 they were going. They're still here in some forms, right? Lehman Brothers, people won't want to know, but that's still hanging around, right? So these things take forever. Don't do anything at the moment. Yeah. You might want to look at fixing your mortgage if you wanted to with Ulster Bank, or looking around. And there's lots of people out there who can get a cheaper mortgage. There's over 100,000 people could move their mortgage and get a cheaper rate right now. So maybe have a look at, and this is a plug, right? CCPC sponsor the TV show, but they have an amazing calculator for mortgages where you pump in your details about your mortgage and they'll tell you where it's cheaper on the market.
Yeah, it's those amalgamating sites where you can shop via the one site. Yeah. I'll throw that up in a second, actually, Owen. Just while you're at the very last question that has squeezed in here. I have a few pensions from previous jobs over the years. Is it best to combine pensions? And Kerry has popped onto that one and said, I'm the same. Jane went to AIB and told me that I can't. Any advice there, Owen? No,
don't put them together. And this has got to do with when you draw them down. Once you put an old pension with, say, your current job, the rules around drawing it down when you retire, you have to draw down it all together. And once you muddle them up, you can't separate them apart. So in really simple terms, by keeping them separate, you can draw them down at different times. That's the really simple answer. There's no advantage to putting them together because typically charges are a percentage of the pot. So 1.5% of 50 grand is still 50 grand, and 50 grand is still the same as 1.5% of 100 grand. So you don't need to worry about from a fees. There's a little bit kind of a pensions board levy once a year, but it's like £8 or something. So I'm not worried about that. Keep them separate. It gives you much more options at retirement.
No, that's super. And there's the mortgage calculator, and other calculators are there on CCPC. Consumer.
And they're a government agency, by the way. It's not a commercial entity. They're a government agency, so it's very independent.
No, that's super. Owen, the time is flying and we're at 10 to the hour. I promised that we wouldn't keep you much longer than that. But your own website is prosperous.ie. And you mentioned that there's the full team. There's the tip of the hat to his dad. I love the video. But there's a full team there and they're all available to have a chat with and make a booking. And thank you very much for sharing that. Owen, in the chat, loads of people are saying apologies, have to go at the top of the hour. But thank you so much for all the tips on credit, savings, pension wise, amazing. So the other
can I give a blatant plug here if you don't mind? If
Please.
Anybody is watching, follow me on Instagram, it'd be great. But there's a book called How to Be Good with Money. I am this close to, it is by far the best-selling personal finance book of 2020. I've been hitting #1 in the charts 3 out of the last 4 weeks. I was #2 one of the weeks, but I am this close to becoming the best personal finance book in Ireland ever. So a couple of more sales and we'll get there. And it's another man in Kildare who holds that current spot. So let's see how it goes.
I love it. The battle between the Kildare books is lovely. So a quick Google finds it. There's an Eason's, and it's not going to break the bank, excuse the pun, but €12, $11.99, and we'll make you a bestseller and the top hit for the Kildare booksellers as well. You mentioned there your Instagram, and I threw it up, but I know after most of the shows you do a live Q&A. So this is the way to any of the questions that we might have missed or some follow-ons.
The live Q&A has gone really well, Noel. So what I do is I just open up my Insta Live, individuals come on, have a bit of a chat, ask them a question, then move on to the next individual. We've someone else actually from Salons coming with me just for the first half of it this Thursday at 9 o'clock. Anna Geary is going to join me on Thursday evening for the first 15 minutes, have a chat with Anna, and then I'll jump on to individuals again. It's proven very popular, and it's a really nice thing because it's immediately after the TV show. The TV show finishes on RTE1 at 9 o'clock. It goes from 8:30 to 9. Then I jump onto the Insta Live, and it's gone really well. And then on Saturdays, I do text responses. So people throw up a question box, people ask me questions, and then over the next 24 hours, I just jump in and out of them answering questions as much as I can.
No, Owen, it's fantastic. I'm from myself, personal point of view, we could talk for hours. And thank you so much for coming in today. I'm going to pass over to Jackie to close out the session before we go to our little networking. Jackie, over to you.
Oh, look, Noel, it's a testament to how popular Owen was this morning. And Owen, you certainly gave John McGuinness a run for his money on the radio. I totally concurred with your thoughts and processes. Do we as a nation want more debt upon us? But I think testament to how popular he has been is the questions kept flowing. As I say, I for one, it's all great. You're here, you don't get that feed from the audience, but I am ringing Bank of Ireland after this to move my money. Why am I paying them? For a card that's sitting there that hasn't moved for a year. But anyway, look, thank you so much, Owen. And indeed, thank you for coming this morning. And don't forget next week's coffee morning, indeed tomorrow's lunchtime learnings with leaders. And Owen, in the distant future, maybe we'll get a more longer extended program with you. A practical workshop. I know John has liaised with you in our office, and thank you, John, for the time put into that. And Aoife that keeps all our social media going. Prompt, if you haven't bought a gift for your mother, maybe that's it. Go on and buy How to Be Good with Money for your mother. And
can I just say, will you please ring a local bookshop and see? Some of the local bookshops will post it out to you. Even if they're not set up online, they will post it out to you. And if you can't get it, go to an Irish bookshop before you buy from somebody else.
Yeah, well said, Owen, and thank you so much for your engagement this morning and the generosity with your time. Guys, keep well, keep safe. Log on to the website. It'll keep you posted on everything we do Noel, as always, thanks for your energy this morning. It's always good to kick Monday mornings, kick the week off with a lively discussion. Thank you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Owen, if you're on Gallery View, have a look around. You're getting a massive virtual round of applause. So thank you very much this morning.